In the first session, very much about this point about global markets and restoring Ukraine's access to global markets, expanding that access, such a critical part of Ukraine's agricultural development to date, and indeed where we might go in the future. We've got a terrific panel that I think is going to be able to shed some important light on where we go next with this. Joining us online, I hope, Emma, is Elena Kovalova. She's a former Deputy Minister of Agrarian Policy and Food of Ukraine. I'm told that you are with us, Elena. You are very welcome indeed. We'll look forward to talking to you as we go through the panel session. Albertina van Volkswinkel from Cargill, Chief Sustainability Officer for Europe and Africa, Middle East. Excellent, we've got the geographical scope correct. And of course, Tassos Hanyotis, who needs little introduction in these circles in Brussels. He is, of course, a former long-standing member, participant in the European Commission, particularly in DG Agri, but delighted that today Tassos is serving on the Advisory Council of Forum for the Future of Agriculture. We're very fortunate to have someone like Tassos with his experience with us. And I'm going to hand the floor to you to just lead us off with, Tassos. You very kindly shared a number of insights to the Forum's Partner Day a couple of weeks ago, looking on this challenge of where productivity has gone, the relationship with sustainability, the geopolitical challenges that productivity faces. And I thought, certainly as we talk about global market access, this was a good place to start with those points, Tassos. And so I'll give you the floor to set the scene for us.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for the opportunity. Glad to be back in full motion. This is part only of a presentation I made. I think we will make the full presentation available on a project I was working for the Forum for Ag event after the conference, but I ended up in the operating table. So now I'm recovering gradually and bringing back the slides. It's actually a comparison of major changes that are happening in agricultural markets, and it's linked to the discussion we're having in Ukraine, but the background is also what is happening in productivity. And there are going to be three main changes that I identify as new drivers in the overall debate about agricultural policy that we didn't face, let's say, 5 or 9 years ago when we signed the Paris Agreement. And I will say from the beginning what they are. One is the level of food inflation. The second is the change in the natural gas prices. And the third is the debate on food security with all these geopolitical tensions we're having, starting with Ukraine. Now, this graph I've presented many times, and it's nothing else than the evolution of the commodity prices. So I dropped the metals. But what you have with green is the evolution of global agricultural prices, with red energy, and energy is coal, natural gas, and diesel. And what you have with the most extreme volatility is the fertilizer index. And what you see in this graph, if you take these three commodity price evolutions, is movement, higher volatility, and what you also see, actually you don't see it from the graph, you have to go back many, many decades, is the long-term downward trend of agricultural prices, something that ag economists like me grew up with, is gone. The long-term trend, downward trend of agricultural prices is no more the case. What is even worse is that the relative term of agricultural prices versus the other prices has deteriorated. So the terms of trade of agriculture have deteriorated. But I have added two other things in this particular graph, which is the dotted lines. The blue dotted line is the world food consumer prices, and the dotted orange line is the world consumer price index. So what we see from this graph already is what is happening in recent years is we have had a faster growth of food prices than the overall inflation. And you'll say, so, I mean, you would expect it with all this significant increase in commodity prices. Yes, I would. And yes, I wouldn't in a certain sense, because if you look now at the food producer prices, this month versus the month of last year, what you have is the evolution of producer prices. That's the World Bank Index. If you take out what is industrial, so you throw rubber, cotton, and tobacco out, and all the rest is all the agricultural producer prices that are linked to food. And what you have with the orange line is the evolution of the FAO food consumer prices. For some reason, they stopped in recent months, but you get the picture. And the picture is that we have had ups and downs in agricultural prices before, but we haven't had this type of ups in food inflation as we have now. And obviously, food inflation is on the way down, and food inflation can go to zero. But then if you look at the absolute level on prices, whether it is in supermarkets or in restaurants, that creates a serious problem in the purchasing power of consumers, and that complicates the whole discussion and debate we have about the green transition. So that's one change. This is a change that is attributed sometimes to what is happening with the Russian invasion and the war in Ukraine, but it precedes that because it started with the asymmetric exit from the COVID, and that's what was the big jump. The second area that I mentioned before is the natural gas prices. Now, especially with the invasion we've seen, and before what was happening with natural gas prices, things tended to have stabilized a bit right now. But even after the stability, what you have with the red is the natural gas prices in the US. What you have with blue is in the EU. And with amber, amber is the EU and blue is Japan. Too early in the morning was working on that, and I changed the colors. So even with more stable, reduced natural gas prices, assume that you are a nitrogen fertilizer producer. You use the same process in the US and in the European Union. 70% of your cost is natural gas. Natural gas price in Europe is 4.5 times more expensive than in the United States. And this incentive, an incentive at the same time, an incentive to focus more on efficiency, but this incentive because there is so much more that you can do in terms of efficiency. So that's the second major change. This has a more direct implication with Ukraine, but of course the blame is not on Ukraine. The blame is called Vladimir Putin. Now, and this is the third area, which in my view is the one that was also raised before, brings Ukraine in the longer term perspective into the debate. These are past wheat food security trends, and I picked up wheat not only because it's 40% of world proteins that are consumed, but it's also the epitome, the flag of food security. And what you have is various players, with the light blue being the 1990. Well, actually, it's a 3-year average, so the years around 1990. And with the green is the 2021, just before the war started. EU and the US, in the table on the left-hand side, globally lost 14 million tons of wheat net exports. They're still big exporters. Most of the loss is because of the US actually reduced its export role in wheat. Australia, Canada, and Argentina, the other traditional exporters, increased by almost 10 million tons. Brazil, China, and India, importers dropped their deficit by another 8. Russia and Ukraine increased together their net export capacity by 70 million tons, while Africa and the rest of Asia increased their deficit in wheat by almost 90 million tons. And you get the picture of what happened in 30 years, just before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, the real question mark is what is going to happen in the future. We don't have answers to that. I looked at what the USDA baseline did because it has more regional detail than DG Agri's baseline, and I'm waiting for the 2nd of July. I think OECD, FAO are coming with their new baseline to find out what the future is, but the future, according to USDA, should look something like this. Again, with green is the last year before the war, and with red is where we could be by 2033. EU and the US are expected to increase exports by 8 million tons. If you look at the details, I think it's too optimistic because the USDA finds wheat land in the US that I don't know where it's coming because it has been on a downward path for almost 30 years. Australia, Canada, and Argentina, mainly Canada, is actually increasing exports. That's more realistic. Brazil, China, and India, pretty much where they are. Russia and Ukraine plus 5 million metric tons, but this is mainly because Russia is jumping up on the red. Ukraine is losing roughly 1/3 of their exports before the war, and Africa and the rest of Asia increasing their deficit enormously. So with this picture, we'll see what will come out in early July. My feeling is that as pessimistic as it looks in terms of the food security situation in Africa, it's still more optimistic than what I believe it's a realistic one. And I hope that in the discussion, we're going to come up to some of these issues. For me, the future debate about the role of Ukraine in the European Union is around this issue mainly, and the question is, are security, if you want to put it more bluntly, is security and food security complements or substitutes? And I think around these debates, we might have a dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. Tassos, thank you for that and for setting the scene. I just want to start with a question before I bring Albertina in, with where you left that. I mean, it's the second time I've seen that. You talk about food inflation, you talk about natural gas prices, you talk about food security. Which one of those is the most pressing for you?
Clearly, the food security, because I think this is the area where in the European Union we do have some confusion, both about the term and what it implies. I mean, you remember in the debate that we have had in recent years, there were ideas that somehow in Europe we don't have a food security problem. But the food security problem is not regional. We don't have a problem of food deficit in Europe, but that's not a food security issue. The food security issue is global, the same way that the climate change is global. And if there is a part of the world that has a food security problem, then we all are going to have this problem. And I think we have underestimated what is actually happening, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, even before all the geostrategic tensions you have. If you add to that all the uncertainties about climate change and what it is expected to do, then you come up with a situation that clearly indicates that we have to decide whether our focus is the European Union or global. And if our focus is global, then the European Union and Ukraine have a parallel converging path to actually cover a significant part of these emerging deficits around the world. If the focus is esoteric, I think with the mentality of and the syndrome of amoeba, we will first start looking only in what the European Union is doing and then internally in what each member state is doing vis-a-vis the other, and we'll lose the big picture. And a point that came up in the discussion before is also part of this big picture. I don't know how we managed to rebaptize an oilseed into a protein crop, but we've done it with soybeans. Now, many, many years ago, we're talking about the mid-'80s, I did a PhD dissertation in the United States that had soybeans also in there. And we have been having this debate about our protein deficits, our soybean deficits since then. Now, it's a global picture again that counts. If you look at soybean yields around the world, there are about 2.5 to 3 tons per hectare. And that includes the European Union that can produce climatically soybeans. Americans are doing it with corn, and we can do it with corn. If you look at wheat yields, the rest of the world is also around 3 tons per hectare. We're 5.5 to 6 tons per hectare. So if we manage to produce the soybeans that we import in Europe, and agronomically we can do it, the world is going to be short at least 30 million tons of wheat on top of what is still missing. And that's a back of the envelope calculation. You plug it in some more sophisticated models, and then you see that there's going to be an impact, a negative impact on world prices that some poor around the world are going to face. So if you look at the big picture, how you determine what is your food security concern and priority has to be done taking all these factors into account.
So that's a big picture that Nazar was talking about earlier. So for you, the convergence then on this food security point, at least between the EU and Ukraine leads us to partnership. It's not a competition. It's clear.
Clearly, it should be that, and that's how we should address Ukraine. We should help Ukraine recover what it had before, this enormous capacity to feed the world. And in the process, of course, Ukraine will also increase its value added. But for me, that's the big priority that Europe, the rest of the European Union as it is today, cannot cover with our production and capacity.
So then just before we move on, if food security is the primary one, that's why I asked you, which was the most pressing. Where do you see food inflation and natural gas?
Well, to put it bluntly, that's where the supply and the demand challenges of the day meet. Food has already become too expensive without the environment getting anything out of it. I mean, there has always been this debate, we need to internalize externalities, food has been cheap, let's make it more expensive so that the environment gets something out of it. The environment didn't get anything out of it. And the capacity of the average citizen to absorb a higher price for food, in my view, is gone. And we've seen it. Also, part of what we've seen is the results of the European election. And if you go onto the supply side, what you need to find, what we need to find is ways whereby we can increase production, and therefore, by increasing production, potentially reduce food prices without repeating the mistakes of the past by hurting the environment. This is today possible, though we don't advertise it well. I mean, there are plenty of best practices that demonstrate you can increase economic and environmental efficiency at the same time. Now, if we manage to do that, then what we will manage to do is produce more with less. And that's the big question. I mean, I made myself not very popular even when I was still in the Commission by repeating this question. Do we need to produce more with less, or can we live with less with less? If we only focus on what the European Union needs, we can clearly have less with less. But the world cannot afford that. And that's where we have to decide whether we play our role in this global environment. And that's once more the case where the European Union and Ukraine have, in my view, converging long-term paths.
Great. Tassos, thank you very much indeed. Elena, whilst Tassos was presenting there, you've popped up on our screen, so it's great to see you in person. I'm going to come to you in a second. First of all, I'd like to turn to you, Albertina. I mean, Tassos, in his own inimitable way, has kind of described the global environment, the trends and trajectories that we've got. You, of course, at Cargill play in many of these markets around the world. I won't presume that I assume that everybody here does know who Cargill is, but just in case isn't, I'd invite you to just say a couple of words about that. Some of the things that Tassos has touched on food security and the environmental dimension on that too, but particularly your perspective on what you're doing in Ukraine and indeed elsewhere in the European Union to bring this partnership together. Albertina.
Thank you, Mark. And first of all, thanks for organizing this. Happy to be here. and I'm representing Cargill, which is a company working with farmers and customers for food and feed. So we're in the middle of the supply chain, connecting the dots. We're a global player, so I very much agree with the view of food security is a global question, and the environmental boundaries is also a global question to address. So we need to feed more people within the planetary boundaries, and I think that's something that keeps me up every day to contribute towards that. I'm part of the partnership and sustainability department, so you can imagine that is something I'm really passionate about. And we're also active in Ukraine, and Ukraine plays a crucial role for the world food security, as already was alluded to by other people beforehand. We're active in Ukraine since 1991. We have various colleagues on the ground. We have facilities. We had crush plants, but we both lost them due to the war. We have a port facility, but I would like to recognize what was said earlier. I'm humbled every day, and I'm super inspired by the people of Ukraine, of how resilient the colleagues are in Ukraine to produce every day the work. They're working with farmers, so the farmers are producing, the colleagues are working with the farmers, getting it to the customers for their animals, getting it to the world via the ports into the world food security to contribute there. That's what keeps them up every day. They want to continue. When we have conversations with them, I have daily conversations with the teams, they want us to talk about business, how we can contribute, how we continue to produce as a country, how we contribute to the world food security. So I think that is just something that makes me humbled when I'm sitting in a safe place. So I just want to call that out. We continue to do business in Ukraine. Cargill is very committed to do business. We continue to actually invest into programs, sustainability programs. I can allude to that in a moment. And of course, we're also working on the humanitarian side. And I think, Jill, you were calling that out. It's crucial to support farmers on getting back to their land safely. So I'm happy that some of the colleagues from Halo are here as well. We're very proud to partner with you. We need to work on inputs for smallholder farmers, larger farmers. We need to restore the soils. We need to look at infrastructure. And we need to, of course, look at the logistics. And that is where the Black Sea indeed was called out already a few times. It's crucial to have that logistic chain open. And I also really recognize what people are saying. It's an opportunity to look in these devastating circumstances at some silver lightning, or whatever you call that in nice English. What can we already do today to build back better and greener? And I think there's various options there. And I think sustainability is part of that solution as well. Irrigation was mentioned, but also the way how we cultivate crops. And actually, it all starts with the farmer. So how can we also incentivize the farmer there? So that is also another access to a market, so that the economy continues to grow as well for Ukraine. So that's a few opening thoughts, probably.
Two very quick questions to follow up on. One we were discussing over lunch, and to the best of your ability or knowledge, do you have a growing confidence that for a company like Cargill to not only maintain but grow its investment in Ukraine, as I understand you are doing? And then secondly, maybe a comment on the trading system as a whole, which has proved actually pretty resilient in the face of both COVID pandemic and also the conflict of moving commodities around the world. There's a particular challenge in Ukraine. How confident are you in that system to help contribute to building back in Ukraine as well, and ensuring that the system does flow?
Good questions. I think probably on the investment side first. We keep on having our operations there despite all the challenges, and I see the colleagues have to go into shelters every day, but they continue to perform really well. So I think that gives confidence, and I was saying that's also why I'm very confident on the system in the end as well. Mm. As Cargill, we made a decision to actually launch a program that we wanted to launch in 2022, which for obvious reasons we halted at that moment. It's to pay farmers for environmental services, so implementing more sustainable practices like cover crops or less till or other practices, and incentivize them to get access for carbon markets. And we actually launched it last April, so just a month and a half ago. And I think it's a signal that we believe we continue to invest in the market. It's uncertain. Nobody knows what's going to happen. But we think the farmers are ready. We've proven how resilient the system is. Farmers continue to produce, and also the sustainability and the environmental needs continue to grow. So in order to produce more sustainably, we feel it's still the right environment to invest in. I think if you want to do larger investments, and I think that was also discussed as outcome of the Ukraine conference, war risk insurance will be critical. And the access to that. If you want to invest into new facilities, like any business, the risk and return will always need to make sense. And if there's a huge risk associated, it's good to get an insurance there. So I think the role of war risk insurance will be critical for private sector large investments to continue to flow into Ukraine. On the system, as the trade system, I joined Cargill only 2.5 years ago, just at the middle of COVID, actually. And I was impressed how the food system remained resilient in that super challenging time. We've seen climate impacts, and I think you were alluding to that one. You see resilience. Now with the war, I would never expect what actually is happening in Ukraine, that colleagues would still go there. The farmers continue to harvest under these extremely challenging conditions. You heard about women being trained now. So I feel that the system is much more resilient than every time. It proves to be more resilient. But trade will be critical because there will be fluctuations. So optionality of trade will be important. So there will be climate change. There will be harvest lost somewhere in the world. There is this geopolitical tensions. So the more optionalities you have for trade, the better the world can rely on feeding where there's deficits or where there's surplus, that goods need to flow. So I think it's critical to rebuild also all the options, and especially the Black Sea option that will be critical for Ukraine, to help to the global food security and the supply globally.
Great to hear that Cargill has started up that investment. Also, for those of us that know me, you know how passionate I am about paying farmers for ecosystem services, and the Cargill program is particularly significant in that context. So the investment is a plus, and also the plus because of what it is funding. So thank you for that, Albertina. We'll be back, no doubt, later as we progress through the panel. Elena, I'd love to bring you in now. You've heard Tassos's overview of kind of where we are. I should look at the camera, so I'm looking at you. You've heard Tassos's overview, the partnership that we can achieve between the EU and Ukraine in filling the global need, the food security need. Just give us your perspective as a former, Deputy Minister of Agrarian Policy in Ukraine. Give us your perspective on what is needed, on where you think Ukraine is today in restoring its access to those global markets to the extent that it is, and what it's going to need to really unlock that as we move forward and ensure that we do develop this partnership and respond to that global need. Elena, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Hi, colleagues, and thank you for having me here. And thank you for organizing such kind of the event. It's really important to hear each other, the challenges of each other and the perspective. And thank you, Tassos, for the tasks you actually raised before the speakers. I would like to start with a broader picture. I don't know if you hear me well. I would like to give you some idea how is important is export for Ukrainian farmers, and not only for agriculture, as we talked before, but as well as all economy. You know that Ukraine is a net exporter, and before the war, the share of agri-food in total export was no more than 40%. But now in the last year, we have 62%, and believe me, the volume in money is less than before the war. What does it mean? It means that agri-food sector just ensures the currency stability in Ukraine and provides a state budget with the taxes that go directly to the defense purposes. And that's why it's so important to keep dynamic of the export. This is from the one hand. From another hand, let's imagine a situation when domestic market of Ukraine is narrowing. You heard the Vice Minister Taras Vysotsky that about 25% of Ukrainian territory is occupied. So we actually don't have possibility, any chance to use this lands and use the capacities of more than about
Challenge there on
power of people.
Elena, we just lost you about 30 seconds ago. You just
Oh,
mentioned
so pity.
territory under control of Russia, and the comments of Minister Vysotsky. That's where I think we lost you.
Yeah. Sorry, this is a consequences of the energy short break, so that's why sometimes it happens. And I will come back to the domestic market. The consumption power is decreasing because the decreasing of the number of population, IDPs, refugees, decreasing the consumption power due to the unemployment level. It's about 19%. It's something unbelievable. So in this situation, farmers and agri-food producers just have to seek the options to sell their products. That's why export is so crucial. Just despite the war impact on logistics, everyday missile attacks on the port infrastructure, Odessa port, the new ports, railway, bridges, and so on. Everyday missiles attack on the energy system of Ukraine that obviously impacts a lot of agri-food production and stability of agri-food production. But what we have just for now, with all these circumstances, with bottlenecks in export that were in 2022 and let's call it complicated export in current situation, Ukrainian agrarian sector has changed. And Nia, I suppose I could give an answer about the protein and soybeans supplied to European Union. Ukrainian farmers just changed the structure of the production side of the oil cultures. It's just obvious because logistically they're more profitable because the logistic costs are huge. And here I'm agree with Albertina that we need to arise and establish system of the insurance, including sea insurance and land insurance of production process and negotiation process. This from the one hand. From another hand, I could say that due to hostilities, due to missile attacks for energy system, Ukrainian farmers and the food processors became more green, and they using more alternative sources of the energy. Not only solar panels and renewable energy, but as well as generators, I mean fuel generators that is not really environmental friendly, but it's necessary to ensure food security, to provide, for example, bread to the shelves every day. And I could say that the third result of this full-scale Russia invasion that was reflected on the food procession, it was automatization. Due to the lack of the personnel, due to impossibility to have some forecast about the number of people you will have on the production maybe next month. It actually forces Ukrainian producers to turn to look onto the automatic system of production and precise technologies, and as well. In this case, I think there are really big space for cooperation here. What else I could say? It's about the Ukrainian, so the export is vital for us. Coming back to the global market and Ukrainian and European Union partnership. If you're talking about the global market, I could say that we couldn't erase Ukraine from the food security map because we are one of the global food security guarantor, and before the war it was about 9% of the wheat export, 55% of the sunflower oil export, and so on. Now we have less due to logistic, but I could say that still we have Ukraine have rather high positions, leading positions in supplying food to the global market. But I could say that the structure, geographical structure of export changed dramatically. Before the war, we have almost equally European Union, Asia, and Africa in geographical structure of export, but now we have 56, maybe 57% of share of the European Union, then about 30% of the Asia, and only 7% it's Africa. And here we could talk about the global food security and the role of Ukraine. If before the war, and now I'm referring to the Albertina, in a total import of African countries, we had 92% of Ukrainian sunflower meal and 66% of Ukrainian sunflower oil. Now we have about 25 and 19%. The same decrease and we feel in all other products and goods. Only due to logistic, we just restored exports to the Egypt, and it's now its position now it's number 7 in the total range of Ukrainian importers. What's crucial for us? Obviously, this is logistic. It's ensuring the work of the Ukrainian ports, not only big Odessa ports, Black Sea ports, but we as well, we have Mykolaiv, we have other ports that could provide huge volumes of export. Due to Ukrainian forces, I mean defense forces, from the September of the last year, it was established, let's call it Ukrainian maritime corridor, and it allows us to export not the same volumes like before the war, but similar to about 7 million tons per month goes, this was the maximum goes through Odessa port. But I could say the Odessa ports, big Odessa ports provides about 70% now of the export. Before the war, it was about 97. The new ports are crucial for us, and the volumes of exports through the new ports rised twice for 2023 year, but it really depends from the weather, from the level of the water, but the new ports could be a good kind of logistic, European Union and Ukrainian logistic. I hope you hear me well, because I see that my internet connection is unstable. What's happening now? This is one of the opportunities. This is the first opportunity, I could say. A lot of investment project on development of infrastructure, export infrastructure in Romania and Moldova and Poland now are now realizing. And this is the ports, Constanța, Giurgiulești ports. This is container terminals in Poland, and so on, so on. This is autostrada, this is bridges. So this is logistic infrastructure. It could be a win-win situation, because we don't know when we will get in full possibility to export like it was before the war through ports of the Black Sea and the Azov Sea as well. So this is the first, logistic and insurance, as well as insurance on container logistics. It's really important for food processing. Then I could say that in terms of the negotiations and cooperation between Ukraine and European Union, it's really important to have stable basis for trade relationships. The ATMs were amazing. They allow to Ukrainian farmers to survive, and support of European Union allow to Ukrainian agriculture producers to survive. We're moving forward. Ukraine chooses European Euro integration as a pathway of the future development. And now what we're thinking about, it's about the stable agreement on trade. Actually, now just started the negotiations. And what is really crucial for us, it's participations of the NGOs in NGOs, business sector, governmental sector, in development or discussion. It depends on chance and possibilities of the common agriculture policy future. We also have to understand the future. We also have to understand the reality that waits for us. And the third position I would like to say, this is about the value chains, European Union and Ukraine. I'm agree with the thesis that the potential way for development, it could be convergent position for export for the third markets, because for Ukraine, European Union, I'll try to find the word. I don't want to say it's not enough, but we could bigger. European Union could absorb all the Ukrainian production or agriculture products, and you couldn't. But now Ukrainian products are a part of the European value chains. And if you will take a look to the agri-food processing and the exports of the neighboring country of Ukraine, like Bulgaria, Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and so you could see that from the beginning of the full-scale invasion and due to some logistic circumstances, the food processing sector in neighboring countries is really increased. And agri-food export increased for 2022 year, if I'm right, from 25% up to 35% in different countries. It means that we as a part of European Union value chain, it's not only about the Hamon, it's about the really different range of the products. So I'm stopping here. And I also would like to react on some questions about the soybeans and China, if it's possible. For the last year, 2023, the export was only 50,000 tons from Ukraine to China, but China imported about 1 million tons last year. So the share of Ukraine is so insignificant. So I'm stopping here and waiting for questions. Thanks.
Olena, thank you very much indeed. An encyclopedic tour of where we are, certainly from your perspective on global market access. I will ask all three of you to comment on just where you think are the critical points that we need to intervene on now to really accelerate the restoration of Ukraine's access to global markets. I mean, you talked a lot there about insurance, stability of trade agreements, Olena, role of automation, new port, existing port capacity, new port capacity. I'm going to ask you all to really focus on maybe one or two that you think is critical. Before we do that, I know the clock is ticking, so I want to be respectful also of the panel to come. Are there any questions or observations, comments that people want to make from the audience before we go to concluding comments? Yes, ma'am.
Again, Alexandra Avramenko, Ukrainian Agribusiness Club. I loved your comment on food security, and security itself is very much connected, and that's what I also try to push in European Union. Why? Because again, as long as Ukraine can export to traditional market and be a partner of the EU in terms of fighting hunger in low-income countries, the better security in EU. The one thing. The second, the better positions of European farmers in the EU. And then Ukraine can also produce the way it used to produce, right? And I mean, in terms of amounts and being a massive producer of cereals abroad. So those comments, those topics are very much connected. And this is, I'm very happy that you also support this idea. That's one thing. And I think we should support it even more in EU. What also important is that given all the circumstances, I'm coming to the question, Given all the circumstances we're living, and the ongoing war is not even helping in understanding how, but imagine war finishes in the end of this year. Hopefully we'll have the next peace summit and we will be able to at least stop fire. And we start the negotiations with the European Union. How do you think European and Ukrainian agricultural sector should communicate between each other, and how to find some common ground in order to not to create additional obstacles for already damaged country to become an EU member state?
Well, I appreciate the preamble. I appreciate the question even more. Tassos, I have to pass that, at least initially, to you. Albertina, Elena, you're more than welcome to comment. I'm going to go to you, Tassos, first. I see other hands in the audience. We'll come back to you. Tassos.
Let me start with a caveat. There is a 2-year cool-off period for those that move out of the European Commission. Still a month and a half before the two. I've had experience with previous enlargements. I remember the analysis and studies we did for the, we still call them new member states. For me, it's the 21st century member states of the EU versus the 20th century. And I remember one thing very vividly. When it came to Poland, we thought that the Polish agriculture was going to be the most problematic agriculture of all, because it had small farms and totally inefficient. I still remember the number of horses that were used to actually, and the type of grains they consumed because of the resistance to collectivization. And Polish agriculture turned out to be the best one in terms of adaptation, maybe because the farmers had a much more direct link to their land than others. I think every case is unique, and in every case, we have to look at the situation as it is, but be able to expect surprises. For me, one surprise that has already come from Ukraine is the resilience of Ukraine, not only in agricultural sector. I mean, it's really impressive. The problem and the challenge I see from the European Union point of view is that we have the tendency to become too esoteric and have an attitude of self-flagellation. The common agricultural policy for the average European citizen is now a failure, no matter where you see it. The common agricultural policy is the policy that allows the OECD to come up with a reform of the policies. If you remove the common agricultural policy, there is no reform on agricultural policies worldwide. The European agriculture is the only major agriculture that reduces emissions. Not as much as we would have liked, but the only one. Yet we still don't understand this in this discussion. So for me, the starting point should be to try to have a calm and logical assessment of what works and what doesn't work. Because there are things that do not work and others that work at the EU level. And I don't see this happening. It's extremely polarized. And that is my worry about how this will fit into Ukraine. And I didn't mention by accident, I thought of putting food security and security as the dilemma, complements or substitutes. I mean, if you look at the debate within the Brussels bubble, we need more money for defense. Yes. Where do we find the money for defense? The common agricultural policy. Give me a break. The common agricultural policy is 0.34% of the EU GDP. And we're talking about how to go close to 2% of the EU GDP. Whatever you do with this, what problem will it solve you? While on the other hand, if you look at what is happening in Africa, who is exporting right in Africa? Not only grains, but coup d'etat, and what the global strategic interest of the European Union is in Africa, then you see how the global strategic and the global food security interests could go together. That type of debate is the one that I think is missing right now. And my feeling is, I know that I'm old-fashioned, but if we go back to some basic numbers and provide an understanding of where we are and how the world is changing, we can put this debate on a more solid basis. I don't know whether this is achievable, but at least it's worth giving a try.
I don't know about everyone else here, but we might do this meeting again in about 1.5 months' time and ask Tassos back to tell us what he really thinks. Albertina and then Elena, same topic.
Yeah, I think as a business, it's really important to have these discussions to get a level playing field and have predictability and continuous reform. So we would welcome that, and I think it's important for the business to have an open dialogue of what works and doesn't work, and how we can play our part. So I think that would be, we would welcome the discussions and really be part of the discussions where relevant, and then continue to strive for reform and predictability.
Elena?
The most complicated and the most easiest for me question, because I'm from Ukraine. Actually, I'm agree with Albertina. We are waiting predictability. And I could say that the negotiation has started. Maybe not officially, but with some communication between the farmers from neighboring country and Ukraine reaction on the Ukraine potential accession from European Farmers Association. And I could say that the only thing that, not the only thing, but really important thing that is necessary, do not forget about, this is communication. And the solid basis, evidence-based communication based on the numbers, on the figures, on the forecast, that's what we need now. This is for my opinion. Thanks.
Thank you, Elena. We've got time for just one more round of questions. So Gilles and then Per. Anyone else? Okay, those are the two we'll take.
I will introduce again myself because the guest speaker was not introduced to me. So I'm Gilles de Yancourt. I am with SEMA today, or Trade Association. You started to touch on the topic or the question I was about to ask, which is what kind of CAP do we need to integrate Ukraine? Because from what I recall, Ukraine is about 32 million hectares arable land. The EU is about 98, from what I recall. So it will be almost a third of the total area of the EU, or a fourth if you add it to the total. So I mean, all the payments, a big share of the payments would go to Ukraine, which would trigger a lot of tensions, political tensions. So and also, so what kind of new CAP we need? Is the hectare-based payment still possible in such a context, or we need a completely new concept? That was a little bit my question.
Great question, Gilles. We'll get you the answer, or we'll endeavour to get you the answer. Per.
Thank you very much. Is this working? Yes, it is working. Per Brodersen, German Agribusiness Alliance. I have a question to you, Tassos. You had a rather positive outlook for Russia's agricultural productivity until 2033, and I'd like to challenge the positive outlook. If I'm not mistaken, the basis for labor force in agricultural sector of Russia will diminish, has already diminished due to the war and its losses. The access for Russian farmers to top-notch technologies, agri-technologies, has also diminished significantly, and Russia will be introducing very tight seed regulations in the upcoming months, which will have a severe impact on the productivity of the sector. So how come that you predict a 20% on top of what we see today? That's what I'd like to know. Thank you.
I'll start from that to clarify. These are not my predictions. This is USDA, United States Department of Agriculture. And I mean, it's not a criticism to them, because the way these are generated is by assuming the current state of knowledge, technologies, and policies. In fact, one of the interesting things, many of the graphs that you see come from an article I wrote in LinkedIn that talks about the need for a credible baseline for EU agriculture. And I think what is important to do is try to identify the areas where we find the big question marks and do scenarios about them. And in a scenario like the one you described, Obviously, Russia is not going to come like that. I agree with you. But then Africa will come much worse. So, and that's why it is extremely important to go back to what we used to do in the past, which is base solid policy decisions on solid analysis. And solid analysis doesn't mean that you have a crystal ball. It means that you run various options based on what you know, and you allow the policymakers to assume the responsibility, providing them what they have. And I see it weakened, not only in the European Union, but globally, because if you dance in the TikTok, you have a better chance actually of convincing politicians than if you do things like that. And coming back to your case, it's pretty similar with policy. I mean, let's make complex things very simple. What is the choice of a policymaker in agriculture? Either you support capital, one factor of production. Nobody wants to support capital. Good luck if you do it. You support labor, and good luck in supporting the million of farmers and having an army running after each one of them to make sure that what they're doing is what they claim and corresponds. Or the other most tangible, if you want, factor of production is land. Now, it's been since the health check, 2007 and 8, that we did analysis after analysis, indicating that the most fair way of actually redistributing support to land would be by taking into account the opportunity cost of land and labor. And the opportunity cost of land and labor is not the same, not only among member states, but even within the member states. Now, if you do this type of exercise, then the discussion of how you integrate, and not in one day or through a transition period, Ukraine, becomes very different than the current one. The second thing, which is part of the current debate, and you will get my answer to that after a month and a half or plus the summer vacation, is what is actually happening if you do this type of transition on area-based payments with the distribution of land and the debate about public money for public goods. It sounds very nice, doesn't it? But public money for public goods would focus on only 20% and maybe 30% of land. And the rest of land would be left out. So the other dilemma that I've been raising for years is, are the private and the public goods also complements or substitutes? Is there such a thing as a jointness in the delivery of the economic and the environmental outcome? OECD has done a study in the again around 2007 on these things, demonstrating why it is important to bring this together. Now, if that's the debate we're going to have, obviously, in this debate, the policy solutions that we will potentially arrive are going to be very different than thinking that we need to go to counter-cyclical type of payments, raising taxes at the borders or what have you. This debate hasn't started, and I don't want to preclude anything. I don't even know what is happening within the European Commission and my former colleagues. I keep the distance for obvious reasons from that. But when this debate comes in public, and it will come in public, these are exactly the questions we need to ask. And if we ask these questions with some basic facts in place, I think we're going to come at solutions, options, various options, that would allow us to see the pros and cons, because there is no magic solution here. Everything has trade-offs. But let's start this discussion based on these facts, and not actually in the fear that if Ukraine comes in, the world will come to an end.
Very good. We're almost out of time, but I do want to give 30 seconds to both Elena and Albertina, bringing us back to where we started from, restoring, enabling Ukraine's access to the global markets. Albertina and Elena, what gives you the most cause for hope, and what still concerns you after this panel session?
I think what gives me the most hope is actually partnerships, and I think we need to look at partnerships and not in competition. I think that was something that was happening there and people were alluding to. The challenges are enormous, the opportunities are there, but I think we can only get it when we work in partnership, because all actors need to restore the system together or continue to build back better. And what pauses me, we need to even do it now and continue now already in these difficult times, not stopping during a time of war, but already starting now, and everybody to help to start now.
By the way, you could have just finished with the optimism. We're good with that as well. Elena, final word to you.
Thanks. What was the pluses was a big plus for me. It's a conversation, and that the Ukraine sounds more and more often on different platforms in European Union. That means that we hearing each other and trying to collaborate. Consensus, common decision, try to find out the approach, even for future common agriculture policy development, let's call it such way. What pauses me, yes, full-scale Russian aggression. I see this as the biggest challenge for Ukraine, everyday challenge, not only for farmers, but the whole population, for economy, for security, for defense, and what is crucial for us, not only in terms of the export and ensuring global food security, it's to support our farmers and support our population. And we are really thankful for all the support and for all the aid we've got from European Union and all the countries. Thank for that.
That's great. Elena, thank you very much indeed. To Elena, to you, Tassos, Albertina, thanks very much indeed for taking the time to join us. We are against the clock, so I'm going to steal your last break, if that's okay. But anybody does want to stand up and stretch your legs, do feel free to do so. But if not, if you can just stay in your seats, and we'll roll right into the last panel session. Once again, Tassos, Albertina, Elena, thank you.